First of all, I'd like to say I decided I'm not going to refer to my retiring. I'm going to call it a course correction. And second, I would love deep thanks to Todd and Mae for the music they chose today. That first hymn, I'm going to cry. It made me cry when I sang it. It was my grandmother's favorite. And the last song that you're singing today is also one of my favorites. So thank you. Yeah, I got lucky. I knew I could trust you. Good morning. Several weeks ago, Christiane preached on what she thought was the lectionary text for that day, only to find out it was from another year. I don't know if you know the lectionary goes in 3-year cycles. But because she had already put in a fair amount of work on her sermon, she decided to stick with it. Only then to discover that Maeve had preached on that same text recently. But still, she stuck with that same text, realizing that countless number of people over the centuries have preached on that text, and hers would not be the first nor the last. I had to smile at this because I have preached on Mary and Martha back in 2019, and my fear was that I was not repeating what someone else had said, but that I was going to repeat myself. I did go back and reread what I had written, and also some of my other sermons. And guess what? I will be repeating myself, just not from that Mary and Martha sermon, but I noticed that there were threads and themes that ran through much of what I have written. Last Sunday, Eileen Morse, Sarah Gallup, and I were talking about how we prepare our sermons. Eileen told us something that Frederick Buechner had said about preaching. There is always one person who needs to hear the sermon that day, and that person is the preacher. The more I thought about this, I realized that the reason these threads and themes keep coming up is that, and I keep revisiting them, is that because they are important to me and they are still working in me. Hopefully, when I repeat something, I am expanding on what I have said earlier, or my understanding of the thread or theme has changed. After all, I am not the same person today that I was back then, and the world has changed as well. Still speaking to me and through me, and I am still listening for some new insight, some new understanding. So here is my current take on this story of Mary and Martha. First, some context. The story of Mary and Martha takes place near the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus had gone with his disciples. It is a time for Jesus to get away from the threat he faces in Jerusalem, and also an opportunity for him to teach and to prepare his disciples for what awaits them when they return to Jerusalem. The passage that precedes this text and the one that follows it are two very familiar lessons that Jesus is laying out for his disciples: the parable of the Good Samaritan and the Lord's Prayer. And in this passage, the story of Mary and Martha, Jesus reveals another lesson. He is identifying the most essential thing for discipleship: our relationship with Jesus and God. Often this passage is interpreted as describing the two components of discipleship, service and devotion. And many, especially women, would have heard this story as Jesus chastising Martha and elevating Mary over her sister. But I think what this story is really about is Jesus pointing out to Martha that she is not present. He is talking about Martha not connecting with him. What if we heard in Jesus' words to Martha, not a rebuke or a comparison, but an invitation, as if he were extending his hand to her to join him, to sit with him, to be in relationship with him, a relationship that, once established, will withstand the worries and the distractions that will eventually return, as they always do. What if Jesus is asking Martha to connect and to collaborate with him? What if he is saying to Martha, choose me today and every day? Now, we don't know what Martha's response was, if she was actually heard Jesus or if she took him up on his invitation. Up until this point, Martha has been distracted and worried about all the tasks she thinks are necessary. And the worry has turned to irritation with her sister and probably, I am guessing, with Jesus himself. I think we all know a little something about worry and distraction. I think we may be hardwired for it. If you were here last Sunday when Sarah talked about her mother's secret to long life being that she didn't worry, I felt a prick of envy. You could see it in all those pictures that Sarah showed, and not one of them did she look worried. But I find it hard not to worry and be distracted. In fact, I find myself often consumed by worry about our country, our world, our planet, and the future for our children. We are assaulted on a daily basis by a steady stream of hateful language and cruel actions, by lies and distortions, by attempts to vanish people, and by suffering that just seems to increase every day. And how many studies, articles, podcasts have you heard recently about the epidemic of loneliness and this paradox between, on the one hand, being the most connected we have ever been in terms of access to information and to each other, and yet at the same time feeling the most disconnected and isolated? I think there's good reason to worry. But here's the thing I am discovering about worry. Do you know what the origin of the word is? It comes from the Old English word wirgan, which means to strangle or choke, as in the teeth of an animal gripping the throat of its prey. And when do we worry? Usually when we are alone. More often than not, worry is a solitary activity, and if unattended, it may lead to despair and hopelessness. In much the same way that the COVID pandemic threatened our very breath, worry too is threatening our ability to breathe easily and robbing us of hope and joy. It keeps us from connecting with God and with each other. It keeps us from taking action, from joining forces with God and our fellow human beings. It is a roadblock to connection and collaboration. In this mindset, which I have had for the last 6 months or so, I have found myself thinking about thresholds. I'm wondering if we are at some crossroads in our history. I have been visited by images and memories. Recently, I came across the movie Castaway on TV. Do you know that movie with Tom Hanks, where he's the FedEx executive and his plane crashes and he's stranded on this island? Well, I can't get the last scene of that movie out of my head. At the very end of the movie, after Tom Hanks has finally made it home and reunites with his former fiancée, whose memory and his love for who has sustained him the entire time that he was stranded. She has moved on. She has married and had a child. And he is heartbroken. But she kept the car they shared and returns it to him. And as he drives away from her in that last scene, the camera pans out and up, and we see the car approaching a four-way intersection and stopping. Which direction will he choose? Where does he go? He can't go back to his old life. He's at a crossroads. I am also reminded of a workshop that I attended a number of years ago called Course Corrections, which is where I took this title from. In this workshop, we studied the story of Saul's transformation into Paul in the book of Acts. Saul is on the road to Damascus to hunt down and persecute the followers of Jesus when he encounters Jesus and is blinded in the dark and helpless. His sight is restored after 3 days, but eventually Saul does a 180-degree turn. He becomes Paul, and now that fierce devotion to persecuting the followers of Jesus is transformed into a fierce devotion to Jesus. Talk about a course correction. In that workshop, we also talked about our own course corrections. And I recall a metaphor that was used called dead reckoning. It's a nautical term for when you are adrift in the dead of night in open waters and there is nothing to guide you. No navigational tools, no current, no wind, no stars or moon to light the way, no land in sight. When I remembered this workshop, I had to wonder, is this where we are now? Are we in some kind of dead reckoning? Are we facing a course correction? And the last memory I'll share is from another course that I took at Andover Newton. Our teacher had arranged for us to interview the Christian theologian Phyllis Tickle shortly before her death. And I remember she had written a book called The Great Emergence, in which she described her theory of how the Christian church has a huge yard sale roughly every 500 years, discarding what isn't working and adopting a new direction. If you start with the birth of Jesus and then proceed 500 years to the Dark Ages, and the church basically goes underground and establishes monasteries, and this is where we get the original early Christian mystics. Then 500 later to the Great Schism, where the Christian church is split in half between the East and the West. Then 500 years later to the Reformation, and another huge shift for this church. And finally, here we are in the 21st century. Think about it. Are we experiencing another yard sale? What is the direction of our church today? What are we being called into today? What is God asking of us as disciples? Is this a course correction for the church? As for our country taking stock, I have heard a lot of talk lately about revisioning our political future. That what was working in the past doesn't seem to be working now. And I am reminded of the words of John Lewis, who implored us to reimagine what we want our future to look like, and then live that future like it already existed. Practice it into being. Whether we are talking about our church, our country, or our world, I don't know what this future is, but I'm pretty sure I won't find it by myself. I do think this revisioning will require connection, collaboration, and making choices. Worry is a choice. Hope is a choice. Connection is a choice. Collaboration is a choice. And I am also convinced that we may need to make these choices every single day because we forget, we get distracted, we worry. It may require a daily mantra, such as getting up every day and saying aloud, "Today is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice in it. Let us choose hope over worry, joy over despair, love over hate. Let us choose to connect and collaborate with God and with each other." I do believe that this is what God desires for us, to work with us in charting our course. Now, as Maeve said, I love poetry. It brings me joy and hope. And so I'm going to close with a poem. This poem speaks to me about connection, collaboration, and choice, but mostly it is about hope. It's about Paul Robeson, a famous black singer from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, with the most beautiful bass baritone voice. He was very active politically, protesting the Korean War, supporting workers' rights, and deeply involved in the civil rights movement. Because of his politics, the U.S. government revoked his passport. He had concerts lined up in Canada, and in those days you didn't need a passport to go to Canada. But then the government forbade him to travel internationally. So concerts were relocated to the Washington State-Canadian border at the Peace Arch, which was constructed in 1814 to commemorate the signing of the Treaty of Ghent and to symbolize the long history of peace between our two nations. Nearly 25,000 people gathered, I'm going to cry, on both sides of the border, with Robeson performing from the American side. This is the poem, Cross That Line, by Naomi Shihab Nye. Paul Robeson stood on the northern border of the USA and sang into Canada, where a vast audience sat on folding chairs waiting to hear him. He sang into Canada. His voice left the USA when his body was not allowed to cross the line. Remind us again, brave friend, what countless countries may we sing into? What lines should we all be crossing? What songs travel toward us from far away to deepen our days? Amen.